Okay, so today, section 4-4, we're going to be completing the square. It's another way to solve a quadratic equation. We covered factoring back in unit 2-3. So now we're talking about completing the square, which is another way to solve a quadratic. All right, and it follows a particular set of steps. Okay, so we're going to talk about those steps as we go through this foldable. So when you open up the first flap of how do you complete the square, when you open up that one, to complete the square for the expression x squared plus bx, you add the square of half the coefficient of the term bx. That is a mouthful. It truly is. So what I'm going to say instead, whatever your b coefficient is, you're going to take half of it and you're going to square it. So you take half of b, you square it, and you add it. Okay? And by doing that, what basically happens is you're turning the left side of this equation into a perfect square trinomial that will factor into x plus b over 2 squared. And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about on the next set of slides, okay? This is how you complete the square. You're basically turning it into a perfect square trinomial. All right? So, baby stepping. Let's practice this. Let's complete the square. Okay, example 1a. You have x squared plus 12x plus c. You need to complete the value of c, and then on top of that, you need to express it as a square of binomials. So you figure out what your b is. What's your b in this problem? 12. You take half of 12. What's half of 12? 6. And then you square that value. What's 6 squared? 36. 36 is the value of c. 36 is what makes x squared plus 12x plus 36 into a perfect square trinomial. Okay? So the value of c is 36. You get that by taking half of b and squaring it. Now to express it as the square of the binomials, that was this part. Okay? What do we get when we took half of b? 6. So on the inside, it's going to be x plus 6 squared. Basically, you're factoring that expression. So the value of c is 36. And when you write it as the square of a binomial, that's your answer there.
So to get c, you do b divided by 2 and then square it?
Yes, exactly. And that's how you complete the square every time. Now, it won't always be a whole number, okay? It won't always be a whole number, which means that the value that goes right in here is what you get when you take half of b, okay? So when you take half of b, whatever this value is, always is what's inside of your parenthesis, every single time. So if it is a fraction or a decimal, if you decide to use your calculator, it's whatever you got when you took half of b, every time. Every time. Okay? Let's look at the second one. You got x squared minus 6x plus c. We're going to find out the value of c, and then we're going to write it as the square of binomials. So you got to take half of b. What's b? -6. You take half of that. What's half of -6? The sign does matter. Okay? Now we're going to square it. And what's that? 9. So c is 9. 9 is what makes this expression a perfect square trinomial. So when we write it as the square of a binomial, what's going to go on the inside? X minus 3. It's whatever you get when you take half of b every time. Every time. Questions on completing the square? We're not at the solving part yet, but you need this skill in order to solve by completing the square. Okay? So, now let's actually solve a quadratic equation by completing the square. Okay? Here we go. Here's your first example. Now the thing is you want it to be in the form of x squared plus bx, on one side of the equal sign. Do we have that? Okay. So then from here, what we need to do is we need to complete the square. What's the process to complete the square? B over 2 and then square it. What's half of negative 14? Then we square it. What's that? 49. Now, because this is an equation, not an expression, that 49 needs to be added not just to the x squared minus 14x side, but also to the 15 side. It's an equation. Whatever you do to one side, you got to do to the other. Okay? And what you'll probably see me do is this right here. Okay? Because it says it's completing the square. So, hey, that's the square that you're completing. That C value, that 49, is what goes in the square. So you are going to add 49 to both sides. To both sides. Okay? So now we're going to continue to solve it. The left side will always be that perfect square trinomial. Okay? What is that when you write it as a square binomial? X minus 7 squared. And then what is 15 plus 49? 64. And now we're going to solve this, okay? To solve for x, I'm going to need to get rid of that squared. How do I get rid of a square? Square root. And let's see who remembers. When you square a square root, what happens? I heard a couple of things. On this side, the square disappears, so I'm just left with x minus 7. And then on the right side, it's a plus or minus whatever the square of 64 is, which is 8. So far, so good? Not done. Almost there. Now, realize that it's x minus 7 equals a positive 8, and an x minus 7 equals a negative 8. So you're going to have two solutions here that you'll need to solve for. Over here, add 7, so x equals 15. And then add 7 over here, and x is going to equal a negative 1. And those are your two solutions. That's how you solve a quadratic, by completing the square. You want to make sure it's in the form of x squared plus bx on the left side. Go do the process of completing the square, which is taking half of b, squaring it, add it to both sides, then basically factor and solve. Okay? Let's look at the second one. I got plenty for you guys to try on your own. Okay? So I just want to kind of go through this together, and I'm going to give you guys something to do on your own. Is it in the form of x squared plus bx? Okay? So first thing we need to do is, we got what? Find the c. So that means we got to go through the process of divide b by 2. Yes, this is what I was talking about. Here's a fraction one. Still doable. We can still do this. So I took b and I did half of b. It is a fraction. I'm always going to stick to fractions. I don't like decimals. I'm always going to stick to them. That's half of b. Now I need to square it. What's negative 5 over 2 times the negative 5 over 2? It's 25 over 4, okay? And you get that by basically, like I say, use negative 5 over 2 times negative 5 over 2, and you just multiply straight across. This is the c value that you're going to add to both sides. So you have x squared minus 5x. Remember, I got to complete the square. I'm going to add it to both sides. So that's going to be 25 over 4, and then 25 over 4. Questions up to here? Why I did not use negative 2.5? I mean, I could. I mean, essentially 25 over 4 is 6.25, which is what you get when you square it. Yeah, I'm using the fraction form. I'm just using the fraction form. Okay. Plus, also good for you guys to practice your fractions. It's also good for you guys to practice your fractions. What is the left side going to factor down to be? Remember, what goes here is what you get when you took half of b. What do we get when we took half of b? A negative 5 over 2. So that's exactly what goes right in there. Whatever we got when we took half of b is what goes right there in that spot. If you notice, I always wrote down what half of b was because that's what always goes into that spot. And what's negative 1 plus 25 over 4? Say again. 21 over 4. Just to refresh your memory, you got to have a common denominator to add fractions. So negative 1 turns into a negative 4 over 4. Then you just add the numerators. Questions? Let's solve. How do I solve? Take the square root. On the left side, the square root and the square go away. What happens? Ooh, flashback, radicals. Huh? 84 square root of 4. Oh my lord. Wait a minute. Y'all don't remember how to do this? Okay, you said split them up. You said split them up. Okay, let's do that. Let's split them up. Thank you. Square root of 21 over the square root of 4. We cannot have a radical in the denominator, but what's the square root of 4? There is no radical on the bottom, is there? So it just turns into the square root of 21 over 2, and we cannot forget our plus or minus. Final step. How do I solve for x? Add. So my final answer is 5 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 21 over 2. That is some type of decimal approximation, but if you give me the decimal, I'm going to be expecting 1, 3 significant figures, and both answers. Technically, you've given me both answers right here in the most exact way. All right. Are there any questions up to here? All right. Last two. Still dealing with solving a quadratic equation, but this time we're going to look at it in standard form. Okay? When it's in standard form, that's when it's ax squared plus bx plus c. Everything's all on one side. So before we can actually go through the process of completing the square, we're going to have to do one step before we do that. Say what? Add the 21. It has to be in the form of x squared plus bx in order for us to complete the square. And I'm going to go ahead and add in my squares because I know I'm going to have to do that here. Then I go through the process. I have to take half of b. What's b? What's half of negative 4? I always write that down because that negative 2 is what's going to go into that parenthesis. What do I have to do to this negative 2? Square it. What's negative 2 squared? 4. I have completed the square. That is the value of my c on my left side. And whatever I do to the left side, I have to do to the right side. The left side always turns into a perfect square trinomial, so I need to write it in its squared binomial. What is it? X minus 2. And that's going to equal 25. From here, we just solve. What do? Take the square root. So this becomes x minus 2 equals a plus or minus 5. When it is a whole number like this, it goes in perfectly. I am expecting 2 solutions. So you are going to need to make sure you give me 2 solutions. X minus 2 equals 5 and x minus 2 equals negative 5. What does x equal? 7 and negative 3. How you feeling? I want you guys to try the last one, 3b, on your own. Okay? I want you to do 3b on your own. I'm going to leave this one up so you can use it as a guide. All right. So looking at 3b, how'd you start? Subtract the 5. Okay? It's going to be negative 5 plus whatever I get when I complete the square. What is b in this problem, Leah? Negative 8. So I have to do what to the negative 8, Elvin? I got divided by 2. Andrew, what is negative 8 divided by 2? Negative 4. And then Alyssa, what do I have to do to negative 4? I have to square. What's negative 4 squared, Nilmarie? 16. What do I do to that 16, Abby? Plug it into the boxes. I got to complete the square with the 16. Now, when I do that, Jonathan, what does the left side become? Left side. X minus 4 squared is what we get when we take half of b. And then the other side is what, Joanie? Equals 11. From here, you've successfully completed the square. You've written it as the square binomial. Very good. At this point, at least, what do? I got to square root both sides. Okay? So that gives me x minus 4 equals a what, Garner? Does it go in evenly? Nope. No decimals, no fractions. Only whole numbers. If it doesn't simplify, then we just leave it. We just gotta leave it. But what do we need when we leave it? What do I need on the outside? I need a positive or negative, plus or minus, okay? And then my final step is to do what, Olivia? I gotta add a 4 over. So did you guys get 4 a plus or minus the square root of 11? That would be your answer. You don't have to plug it into the calculator. If you want to, that's fine. But like I said, if you're going to use the decimal approximations, you better give it to me as 3 significant figures. And I better have both of them, whatever 4 plus the square root of 11 is and whatever 4 minus the square root of 11 is. Okay. If the radical does simplify, I would be expecting that, though, because you guys should know how to do that. Okay? All right. Any questions on completing the square? Okay. Grab a marker and a felt. Yes, you do glue it in. Okay? Okay. Let me show you this one. Okay? So you're adding this one into your notes. Somewhere. Now, if you notice, this one was different from all the ones that we've done. Okay? Besides the fact that it is, got that plus 6 there. So we're going to need to fix that. But also, it's not in the form of x squared plus bx. It's in the form of ax squared plus bx. There's an actual a. In order to complete the square, a has to be 1. In order to complete the square, a has to be 1. If it's not 1 like it is in this case, you got to make it a 1, okay? So you guys are adding this example into your notes, okay? You're adding this example into your notes. So I'm going to start first by subtracting over that 6, okay? I'm going to start first by subtracting over that 6, just like how we would any other time. And now I have to make my a 1. How do I turn 2 into 1? divide by 2. But when I divide by 2, I can't just divide a by 2. I have to divide every single term by 2. So I have to divide the 7x by 2 and the negative 6 by 2 to get it actually in the form of x squared plus bx. Okay? So now I have x squared plus 7 over 2x equals a negative 3. Now I'm able to complete the square. Did everybody catch that? So if a is not 1, if it's not in the form of x squared, whatever, you got to divide every single term by that a value. Now I can complete the square, okay? I have to take half of b. What's b? 7 over 2. I have to take half of b. I have to take half of b. Keep, change, flip. What does that become? No, not the same thing. 7 over 4. That is half of b. This is the number that's going to go into the parentheses when we factor. Okay? But now I have to do what to half of b? I have to square it. What's 7 over 4 times 7 over 4? 49 over 16. Yes. You guys can do this. You can do these fractions. I believe in you. Okay? That is what I'm going to add into both of these squares. 49 over 16. So far, so good? Now the left side will always factor because you turn it into a perfect square trinomial. But remember, what goes inside the parentheses is what you got when you did what? Divided b by 2, took half of it. What did we get when we took half of b? That's it, goes exactly in that parenthesis, that value. And what's negative 3 plus 49 over 16? 1 over 16. Because you got to get a common denominator. Got to multiply negative 3 over 1 by 16 over 16. Turns into negative 48 over 16. Negative 48 plus 49 is positive 1. What do I do from here? Take the square root. And it is a perfect square. What's the square root of 1 over 16? 1 over 4. So you have x plus 7/4 equals a plus or minus 1 over 4. So your two solutions are going to be what you get when you do minus 7 over 4 plus 1/4 and minus 7 over 4 minus 1/4. Can I add these fractions the way they are? What's negative 7 plus 1? This simplifies to negative 3/2, so that's one of your solutions. What's negative 7 minus 1? Well, actually, it's negative 8 over 4, and then the answer is negative 2. This is how you complete the square when it's not in the form of x squared plus bx. Okay? You have to divide the a by every single term and then go through the process, okay? So do we add that to our notes? Okay. I want you to try one of these on your desk, okay? I want you to try one of these on your desk. And we are